I'm Mia, and I'm 15. My sister just destroyed my entire life with 3 sentences, and my mother's looking at me like I'm something she scraped off her shoe. She's pregnant, Jessica announced from the living room doorway, her arms crossed with that satisfied smile she gets when she knows she's about to ruin someone's day. With Mr. Davidson's baby. You know, the married guy who owns the hardware store. The silence that followed was so thick I could taste it. Mom's coffee mug hit the kitchen counter with a sharp crack. Dad's newspaper rustled as his grip tightened. And me? I just stood there like an idiot, my backpack still hanging off my shoulder, trying to process what had just happened. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely blindsided by family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Because here's the thing about my family. They never asked questions when Jessica talked. She was 21, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When she spoke, they listened like it was gospel truth coming down from heaven. That's impossible, I whispered, my voice barely audible. But nobody was looking at me anymore. They were all looking at Jessica, hanging on her every word like she was announcing the weather. I saw them together, Jessica continued, her voice gaining confidence with each lie. Behind the hardware store last Thursday after school. They were… She paused dramatically, letting their imaginations fill in the blanks. Mom's face went from confused to disgusted in 3 seconds flat. Mia, her voice cut through the air like a blade. Is this true? No, the word exploded out of me. Mom, I've never even talked to Mr. Davidson except to buy supplies for school projects. This is insane, but the damage was done. I could see it in their faces. That shift from confusion to disappointment to complete revulsion. Jessica had painted the picture, and they were already hanging it on the wall. Don't lie to us, Dad said, standing up from his chair with that particular tone that meant he'd already made up his mind. Your sister wouldn't make something like this up, wouldn't she? Because making things up was basically Jessica's superpower. Like the time she convinced them I'd stolen $20 from her purse when I was 12. Or when she told them I was skipping school to hang out with older boys, which was particularly hilarious since I was too shy to talk to boys my own age. But they never remembered those times. Jessica's lies had a way of evaporating from their memory the moment they served their purpose. Mom, please, I tried again, desperation creeping into my voice. You know me. You know I would never… I thought I knew you, Mom said, her voice thick with disgust. But this? She gestured toward my stomach like she could see something that wasn't there. This is exactly the kind of shameful behavior I've been worried about. The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening. This was the kind of nightmare you wake up from, gasping and grateful it wasn't real. Except I wasn't waking up. You've brought shame to this entire family, Mom continued, her words hitting like physical blows. What will people think? What will they say about us? That's when I realized it wasn't really about what I'd supposedly done. It was about how it made them look. Because in our family, image was everything, and I'd just become a stain on their perfect reputation. Jessica watched from the doorway, her expression carefully neutral now, but I caught the tiny smile playing at the corner of her mouth. She was enjoying this. She'd planned this moment, crafted it, and now she was watching it unfold like her own personal soap opera. Pack your things, Dad said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of finality. You can't stay here. The words hit me like a slap. What do you mean, pack my things? You're 15 and pregnant by a married man, Mom said, her voice rising with each word. We will not harbor this kind of behavior under our roof. You've made your choices. But I'm not pregnant, I screamed, my composure finally breaking. I've never even kissed anyone, let alone… This is Jessica lying, like she always does. But they were done listening. Mom had already turned away, her shoulders rigid with disgust. Dad was shaking his head like I was a lost cause. And Jessica? She had the nerve to look sympathetic. Maybe if you tell them the truth about the baby, she said softly, they'll let you come back after it's born. The truth about the baby that didn't exist. The baby she'd invented out of thin air to destroy me. 30 minutes later, I was standing on our front porch with a backpack full of clothes and nowhere to go. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything I'd ever known. I was 15 years old. I'd lost my family, my home, and my childhood in the span of 1 hour. And the worst part? I still couldn't understand why Jessica had done it. But I was about to learn that understanding your family's cruelty doesn't make surviving it any easier. The first night was the worst. I spent it on a bench in Riverside Park, clutching my backpack and jumping at every sound. Every car that passed made me hope it might be Mom or Dad coming to find me, to say they'd made a terrible mistake. The car never came. By morning, I was hungry, cold, and starting to understand that this wasn't temporary. They really meant it. I really was on my own. I'd always been the responsible one, the one who got good grades and followed rules. So walking into the McDonald's on 5th Street to ask for a job felt like stepping into someone else's life. But empty stomach trumps pride every single time. "How old are you, honey?" asked the manager. A tired-looking woman named Sandra with graying hair and kind eyes. 18, I lied smoothly. I'd been practicing that lie for the past hour. Sandra looked me up and down, taking in my rumpled clothes and the desperation I was probably radiating. "Can you start today?" That's how I learned that sometimes people don't ask too many questions when they see someone who needs a break. The job paid minimum wage and came with the understanding that I'd work whatever shifts Sandra needed filled. I mopped floors, cleaned bathrooms, and learned that the phrase, "the customer is always right," is complete garbage when you're dealing with people who treat fast food workers like they're invisible. But it was money, and money meant food. And food meant I could survive another day. I found places to sleep. The 24-hour laundromat on Pine Street had a bathroom where I could wash up. The public library became my daytime refuge. Warm, quiet, and full of books that let me escape from my reality for a few hours. 2 weeks into my new life, I ran into Mrs. Peterson from my old neighborhood. She was coming out of the grocery store when she spotted me coming out of McDonald's in my uniform. "Mia?" Her face crumpled with confusion. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be in school?" I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head, but facing someone who knew me before everything fell apart made my throat tight. "I'm taking a break from school. Working for a while." She looked at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Where are you living, honey? Are your parents okay with this?" The laugh that came out of me was sharp and bitter. "My parents are fine with it." Mrs. Peterson's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Mia, are you living on your own?" For a moment, I considered telling her everything. Mrs. Peterson had always been nice to me, had even helped me with my science project 2 years ago when my parents were too busy with Jessica's college applications. But what was the point? She couldn't fix this. Nobody could. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Really, this is just temporary." She didn't look convinced, but she let me go. I watched her walk to her car, probably going home to her normal family with their normal problems. Meanwhile, I was going back to my shift, because rent on my tiny efficiency apartment wasn't going to pay itself. Oh yeah, did I mention I'd found an apartment? Well, apartment was generous. It was basically a room with a hot plate and a bathroom down the hall that I shared with 3 other tenants. But it was mine. And after 3 weeks of sleeping in parks and laundromats, having 4 walls and a door that locked felt like luxury. The landlord, Mr. Chen, was either incredibly trusting or incredibly desperate for tenants because he didn't ask for references or run credit checks, cash deposit, first month's rent, and it was mine. "You work?" he asked in broken English when I handed him the money. "Yes, sir. McDonald's on 5th Street. He nodded approvingly. "Good. Work is good. You need anything, you ask." It wasn't much, but it was kindness when I desperately needed it. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the exhaustion or even the loneliness. It was the constant ache of confusion. I still couldn't understand why Jessica had destroyed my life. We'd never been close, but I'd never thought she actively hated me. But lying awake in my tiny room, listening to the sounds of the city through my thin walls, I started to piece together a pattern I'd been too naive to see before. Every time I'd succeeded at something, Jessica had found a way to undermine it. When I made honor roll, she'd mention how easy my classes were compared to her advanced courses. When I got picked for the debate team, she'd joke about how I just liked to argue with everyone. Small things, tiny cuts that I'd brushed off as sibling rivalry. But this wasn't rivalry, this was something else entirely. As I drifted off to sleep in my narrow bed, I made myself a promise. I was going to survive this. And someday, somehow, I was going to understand why Jessica had needed to destroy me to feel good about herself. What I didn't know yet was how much stronger you can become when you have nothing left to lose. By month 3, I'd developed what you might generously call a routine. Up at 5 a.m., shower in the communal bathroom before anyone else woke up. McDonald's by 6 for the breakfast shift. Library from 2 to 6 to study with books I'd borrowed. Evening shift at a gas station convenience store from 7 to midnight. Sleep, rinse, repeat. The gas station job was an education. Let's put it that way. Working overnight in a convenience store in the less desirable part of town teaches you things about humanity that you don't learn in high school civics class. Like how to spot someone who's going to try to rob you. Hint, they spend way too much time looking around and not enough time looking at what they supposedly came to buy. Or how to handle drunk college kids who think it's hilarious to mess with the teenage girl behind the counter. Hint, the panic button under the register isn't just decorative, but it was also where I met Tony, the night security guard who worked the building next door. Tony was probably 60, built like a linebacker gone to seed, and had a protective streak a mile wide. "You're too young to be working these hours," he told me on my first week, appearing at my window around midnight with a cup of coffee. "I'm 18, I said automatically. Tony snorted. "And I'm 35. Try again." I liked him immediately. Tony was the first adult in months who'd called me on my lies but didn't make me feel ashamed of them. "None of my business," he said when I didn't elaborate. "But you got family. People who know where you are?" "No family," I said, which felt truer than any lie I'd told. Tony became my unofficial guardian angel. He'd stop by every night during his rounds, making sure I was okay, sharing coffee and stories about his own complicated family. He never pushed for details about my situation, but his presence made those long, lonely hours feel less dangerous. It was Tony who suggested I get my GED instead of trying to go back to high school. "You're smart enough," he said one night when I was complaining about falling behind. "And you're already more responsible than half the adults I know. Why waste time sitting in classes when you could be getting ahead?" The GED program met twice a week at the community college. I used my McDonald's meal breaks to attend sessions, cramming education between shifts. The other students were mostly older, adults who'd dropped out for various reasons and were trying to get their lives back on track. I fit right in, which should have been depressing, but somehow wasn't. My test scores were high enough that my instructor, Ms. Rodriguez, pulled me aside after the results came in. "Have you thought about college?" she asked. The question was so absurd I almost laughed. College? I was 17, working 2 jobs just to afford rent on a room the size of a closet. College wasn't even in the same universe as my reality. "I can't afford college," I said simply. "There are programs," she said, handing me a folder full of pamphlets. "Community college has financial aid. You could start part-time, take evening classes." I took the folder but didn't have much hope. Still, that night during my gas station shift, I read through everything. Grants, scholarships, work-study programs, a whole world of possibilities I'd never known existed. The application process was daunting, but I was getting good at figuring things out on my own. I filled out form after form, wrote essay after essay about my educational goals and life circumstances. I didn't mention being homeless at 15. I didn't mention my family's betrayal. I wrote about being a motivated student who'd taken a gap year to work and was ready to focus on education. Technically true, just missing a few crucial details. 6 months later, I was accepted into the community college with enough financial aid to cover tuition. I was also promoted to assistant manager at McDonald's, which came with a small raise and more responsibility. I was 18 years old and felt like I'd been living on my own forever. The day I got my acceptance letter, I almost called my parents to tell them. I had their number memorized, could picture Mom's face when she heard I was going to college despite everything they'd put me through. But then I remembered the look of disgust in her eyes that last day. The way she'd said I brought shame to the family. The ease with which they'd thrown me away when Jessica fed them a convenient lie. I deleted their number from my memory instead. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. College was where I learned that being an outsider could actually be an advantage. While my classmates were figuring out how to do laundry and budget for groceries, I was already 3 years ahead on life skills. I took business classes because they seemed practical, but I was drawn to psychology courses too. Understanding people, what motivated them, what made them lie, what made them cruel to those who loved them, had become a survival skill. Professor Williams in my Intro to Business class was the first teacher who really saw potential in me. I turned in a paper on small business marketing strategies that went way beyond the assignment requirements. I'd actually interviewed local business owners about their challenges, including Sandra from McDonald's. "This is graduate-level work," she told me after class. "Have you considered transferring to a 4-year university?" "I can't afford it," I said automatically. That was my answer to most opportunities. "Let me ask you something," she said, settling back in her chair. "If money weren't an obstacle, what would you want to do with your life?" Nobody had ever asked me that before. Even before Jessica's lie destroyed my family life, conversations about my future had been limited to "get good grades" and "don't embarrass us." "I think I'd like to start my own business," I heard myself say. "Something that actually helps people instead of just making money off them." Professor Williams smiled. "There are ways to make that happen. But first, you need to think bigger than community college." She helped me apply for transfer scholarships, wrote recommendation letters, and even connected me with business owners who could offer internships. For the first time since I'd lost my family, an adult was investing in my future without expecting anything in return. I transferred to State University with a partial scholarship and student loans that terrified me but seemed worth the risk. My living situation improved marginally. I shared a tiny off-campus apartment with 2 other students who barely acknowledged my existence, which was perfect. University was harder than community college, but also more rewarding. I double majored in business administration and psychology, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working 20 hours a week at a coffee shop near campus. Junior year, I started my first real business, a tutoring service that matched struggling students with high-performing peers. Simple concept, but I saw how much money students were paying for professional tutoring and realized I could offer the same quality for half the price while paying the tutors better than minimum wage. Within 6 months, I had 15 tutors working for me and a waiting list of clients. "You have good instincts," said Dr. Peterson, no relation to Mrs. Peterson from my old neighborhood, my business strategy professor. "Most students your age think starting a business means having a revolutionary idea. You understood that execution matters more than innovation. The tutoring business taught me about profit margins, customer service, and managing people. It also taught me that I was good at seeing opportunities that others missed. During my senior year, I sold the tutoring business to an education company for enough money to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a small duplex. I lived in one unit and rented out the other, creating my first passive income stream. At 21, I was debt-free and a property owner. Not bad for someone who'd been homeless at 15. Graduation day was bittersweet. I had nobody there to watch me walk across the stage, but I'd learned to celebrate my achievements privately. I took myself to dinner at the nicest restaurant I could afford and toasted my degree with expensive wine. "To surviving," I said to my reflection in the restaurant window. But surviving wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to thrive. After graduation, I moved to the city and took a job with a marketing firm. The pay was decent, but more importantly, I was learning how successful businesses really operated. I watched my boss close deals, studied how he managed clients, and absorbed everything I could about scaling operations. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted twice and was managing accounts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I was also developing my own client base on the side, providing marketing consulting for small businesses. My boss eventually found out about my side business. "Mia," he called me into his office on a Wednesday morning that I was sure would end with me getting fired. "I understand you've been freelancing," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Yes, sir," I said. "No point in lying." "Good for you," he said, surprising me completely. "When are you planning to go out on your own?" What? "You're too good to work for someone else forever," he said. "And frankly, I'd rather help you launch successfully than pretend I don't see what's happening." He offered to be my first major client when I started my own firm, and to recommend me to his network. It was the kind of generous gesture that still caught me off guard when it came from adults. At 24, I opened MK Marketing Solutions. Within 3 years, I had 12 employees and clients in 3 states. Within 5 years, I was a millionaire. I was 29 years old and had built everything myself, from nothing. Sometimes I wondered what my parents would think if they could see me now. But mostly, I was too busy building my life to waste time on people who'd thrown me away. By 32, I wasn't just successful. I was the kind of successful that made business magazines write profiles with headlines like, "Self-made millionaire reveals her success secrets." MK Marketing Solutions had become one of the most respected boutique firms in the region. We specialized in helping small and medium businesses compete with larger corporations through strategic digital marketing and brand positioning. It was satisfying work that actually made a difference, which mattered more to me than just making money. Though I'll admit, the money was nice too. I'd bought a house in the historic district. Nothing flashy. Just a beautifully restored 1920s colonial with a home office and enough space for the life I'd built. I traveled when I wanted to, drove a reliable car that I'd paid cash for, and had the kind of financial security that most people only dream about. But perhaps more importantly, I'd built something that couldn't be taken away from me. My business, my reputation, my skills, they were mine in a way that family love had never been. I was at my office late one Thursday evening, reviewing proposals for a new client, when my assistant Jennifer buzzed in. "Mia, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your sister." The words hit me like cold water. I hadn't heard from Jessica in 14 years. For all I knew, she could have been living on Mars. "Did she give you a name?" I asked, stalling. "Jessica. She said you'd know her." I considered having Jennifer tell her I wasn't available. It would have been the smart thing to do, but curiosity won over caution. "Send her in," I said. Jessica walked into my office like she owned the place, which was rich considering the last time I'd seen her. She'd owned me instead. She looked good. Designer clothes, professional haircut, the confidence that comes from never having to doubt whether you'll have a roof over your head tonight. "Mia," she said with a smile that was probably supposed to seem warm, "you look amazing. Success suits you." I didn't stand up or offer her a seat. "What do you want, Jessica?" She laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl with familiarity. Straight to the point, just like always. Can't I just want to see my sister? Not for 14 years you couldn't. Her expression flickered slightly, but she recovered quickly. I know we have things to work through. I know you're probably angry. Angry? I leaned back in my chair and really looked at her. Jessica, I was a homeless teenager because of you. Angry doesn't begin to cover it. You weren't homeless, she said quickly. You had choices. You could have come back any time if you'd just admitted. Admitted to what? My voice was deadly quiet. To being pregnant with a baby that didn't exist? To having an affair with a man I'd barely spoken to? To the lie you made up for reasons I still don't understand? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mom and Dad are getting older, she said finally, switching tactics. They miss you. I almost laughed. They miss me? The daughter who supposedly brought shame to their family? The one they threw out without asking a single question? People change, Jessica said. They've realized maybe they were too hasty. Too hasty, I repeated, like it was a parking ticket not throwing away their child. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't going the way she'd planned, and I found myself enjoying her discomfort more than I probably should have. What do you really want? I asked again. She sighed and dropped the act. Look, things have been tough lately. Mom needs some medical procedures and Dad's business isn't doing well. I thought, since you've obviously done well for yourself, and there it was. The real reason for this reunion. Money. You want me to financially support the people who disowned me, I said slowly, making sure I understood correctly. It's what family does, she said, and the irony was so thick I could taste it. I stood up, walked to my window that overlooked the city I'd conquered through sheer determination. Jessica, let me tell you about family. Family doesn't throw out children based on lies. Family asks questions. Family gives the benefit of the doubt. Family supports each other through difficult times. I turned back to face her. You and our parents taught me that blood relation means nothing without trust, respect, and love. So congratulations. You successfully taught me that you're not my family. Her face hardened. You can't stay angry forever. Mia, it's not healthy. I'm not angry, I said honestly. I'm indifferent. You're a stranger who shares my DNA, asking for money from someone whose life you helped destroy. The answer is no. She stood up, her composure finally cracking. You used to be such a sweet girl. What happened to you? I smiled for the first time since she'd walked in. I grew up, thanks to you. After she left, I sat in my office as the city lights flickered on below. I felt lighter somehow, like closing a book I'd been carrying around for years. I was 32 years old, successful, and completely at peace with the family I'd chosen to build instead of the one I'd been born into. What I didn't know was that Jessica's visit was just the opening act. The real show was about to begin. 2 months after Jessica's surprise visit, my carefully constructed life received another shock. But this time, it wasn't from my family. I was having lunch with my client, Rebecca Martinez, owner of a successful catering company, when she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. You know, the strangest thing happened last week, Rebecca said, cutting into her salad. My friend Linda. You remember Linda, the one who owns the flower shop? She told me the most ridiculous gossip about her ex-husband. My hand froze halfway to my coffee cup. Rebecca was talking casually, unaware that she was about to detonate a bomb. Apparently, Linda was going through old financial records for their divorce settlement. This was years ago, but her lawyer needed documentation, and she found these charges on their joint credit card from when she was out of town visiting her sick mother. Hotel rooms, expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases, all from about 14 years ago. The room started spinning. I forced myself to keep breathing normally. The weird part is, Rebecca continued, Linda remembered that time period specifically because that's when there was all that drama with the Gardner family. You know the Gardners? Tom Gardner owns the hardware store downtown. I knew exactly who Tom Gardner was. More importantly, I knew exactly what Rebecca was about to tell me. Linda's ex-husband was supposedly having an affair with their teenager daughter. At least that's what everyone said at the time. The whole family imploded over it. But looking at these receipts, Rebecca paused to sip her drink. Linda realized the affair wasn't with the teenager. It was with the older daughter, who was already 21 and definitely old enough to know better. The coffee cup rattled against my saucer as I set it down. My hands were shaking. Linda confronted her ex about it last week when she found the evidence. He finally admitted everything. Apparently, he'd been seeing Jessica Gardner for months, not the younger girl. But when his wife almost caught them, Jessica panicked and convinced him to let her younger sister take the blame. Said it would blow over faster if everyone thought it was just a teen making bad choices. The restaurant felt like it was closing in on me. 14 years of wondering, 14 years of carrying that confusion and pain, and the answer had been hidden in a credit card statement all along. The really awful part, Rebecca said, oblivious to my internal collapse. Is that the younger girl? Mia, I think. She ended up homeless after her parents kicked her out. Meanwhile, Jessica just went on with her life like nothing happened. Linda said she feels terrible about not speaking up sooner, but she didn't want to get involved in family drama. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was successful, confident, in control of her life. But underneath, I was still that confused 15-year-old girl, asking why her sister had destroyed her world. Now I knew. Jessica had been having an affair with a married man. When they almost got caught, she'd sacrificed me to save herself. Not because she hated me, not because of some deep-seated rivalry, but because it was convenient. I was the expendable one. I returned to lunch, finished my meeting with Rebecca, and drove home in a daze. That evening, I sat in my home office and did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator. I need to know everything about what happened 14 years ago, I told him. I need proof. 3 weeks later, he delivered a file that confirmed what Rebecca had told me. Credit card receipts, hotel records, witness statements from people who'd seen Jessica and Tom Gardner together. Even a photo from a restaurant's security camera, time-stamped and undeniable. The affair had lasted 8 months. Jessica had been careful, but not careful enough. When Tom's wife Linda started getting suspicious, Jessica had made a calculated decision to throw me under the bus to protect herself. I stared at the evidence spread across my desk and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because the truth was good, but because it finally made sense. Jessica hadn't destroyed my life out of malice or jealousy. She'd done it out of self-preservation, like someone pushing their sibling off a lifeboat to save themselves. It was almost worse than hatred. At least hatred was personal. This was just practical. The ironic part? The truth was about to come out anyway, 14 years too late. Linda was done keeping secrets to protect people who had never cared about the damage they'd caused. She was telling everyone who would listen about her ex-husband's lies and Jessica's manipulation. By the time the truth reached my parents, it would be too humiliating to ignore. The whole town would know that they'd thrown out the wrong daughter. I didn't have to do anything. Justice, as it turned out, had its own timeline. I was about to learn that vindication feels very different when you no longer need it to heal. The truth has a funny way of surfacing when you least expect it. Linda Gardner, yes, that Linda Gardner, Tom's wife, had apparently spent years living with suspicion gnawing at her like a persistent headache. But it wasn't until their divorce proceedings required a deep dive into old financial records that she found the smoking gun she'd been unconsciously looking for. I learned all this because Rebecca couldn't help herself from calling me with updates. Apparently, Linda had confronted Tom the night she found those credit card statements, armed with 14 years of accumulated doubt and finally having proof. "You should have heard her," Rebecca told me over the phone, her voice vibrating with gossip-fueled excitement. Linda marched right into Tom's apartment, yes, they're separated now, and slammed those receipts down on his kitchen table, asked him to explain why he was buying jewelry and paying for hotel rooms when she was out of town caring for her dying mother. I was sitting in my home office, supposedly reviewing quarterly reports, but Rebecca's call had my complete attention. At first, he tried to deny it, she continued, said maybe someone stole his card information, but Linda had done her homework. She had dates, times, amounts. Everything matched up perfectly with when she was away, and Jessica was supposedly working late at that boutique job she had. The boutique job. I remembered that. Jessica had been so proud of her part-time retail position, acting like she was some kind of fashion mogul. Turns out she was using it as cover for her affair. When Linda threatened to take the evidence to a lawyer, Rebecca said, Tom finally broke down and admitted everything. The whole affair, start to finish. But here's the really sick part, Mia. When Linda asked him about the rumors that destroyed your family, Tom told her the truth. Jessica convinced him to let you take the blame because it would be easier for everyone if people thought it was just a teenager making bad choices. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Easier for everyone. Everyone except the 15-year-old who lost her family, her home, and her childhood in one night. Linda lost it, Rebecca continued. Completely lost it. She told Tom that he and Jessica destroyed an innocent kid's life to save their own skins. She called them both monsters. I had to hand it to Linda. Better late than never, I suppose. But the real bombshell came next. Linda's done keeping their secret, Rebecca said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She's telling everyone, and I mean everyone. She started with Tom's business partners, then moved on to the church congregation, then the PTA moms. She even posted about it on Facebook. My coffee went cold in my hands as I processed this. After 14 years of living with their lie, the truth was finally coming out. Not because I'd fought for it or demanded justice, but because Linda Gardner had reached her breaking point. What exactly is she saying? I asked. The truth. That Tom had an affair with Jessica Gardner, not her teenage sister. That they let an innocent girl get thrown out of her home to protect themselves. That everyone in town participated in destroying a child based on lies. The irony was almost too perfect. Jessica had sacrificed me to save her reputation, and now Linda was sacrificing Jessica's reputation to restore mine. The cosmic justice of it was almost beautiful. How are people reacting? I asked, though I could guess. Oh, Mia. Rebecca's voice was rich with satisfaction. People are furious, especially the mothers. The idea that a grown woman would let a teenager take the blame for her affair? It's not playing well. Jessica's name is mud around here. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below because this story is about to take another dramatic turn. I hung up with Rebecca and sat in my quiet office, processing this development. For years, I'd imagined what it would feel like to be vindicated, to have everyone know the truth. I'd pictured myself feeling triumphant, justified, maybe even smug. Instead, I felt empty. Not sad, not angry, just hollow. Like someone had handed me a prize for a race I'd stopped caring about years ago. The phone rang again an hour later. This time it was my assistant, Jennifer. Mia, there's a woman online too claiming to be your mother. She sounds upset. My mother. The woman who'd looked at me with disgust and told me I'd brought shame to the family. The woman who'd chosen to believe Jessica's lies without asking a single question. I stared at the blinking light on my phone for a full minute, my finger hovering over the button. After 14 years of silence, what could she possibly have to say? I picked up the phone. This is Mia. Mia? Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Fragile. Mia, honey, is that really you? Honey. Like we'd talked yesterday. Like she hadn't thrown me away like garbage when I was 15. Hello, Mom. The silence stretched between us, filled with 14 years of unspoken pain. We need to talk, she said finally. Your father and I, we need to see you. There are things we need to say. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the city I'd conquered without them. I'm listening. Not over the phone, she said quickly. Please. Can we meet somewhere? Anywhere you want. We'll come to you. They'll come to me. How generous of them. But curiosity won over caution, just like it had with Jessica 2 months ago. Fine, I said. Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll text you the address. After I hung up, I realized I was smiling, not with happiness, but with anticipation. 14 years ago, they'd held all the power. They'd made their judgment and executed their sentence without giving me a voice. Now they were coming to me, hat in hand, ready to face the consequences of their choices. Oh, how the mighty had fallen. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes everything feel dramatic and significant. I chose to meet them at Meridian, the upscale restaurant where I often entertained clients. Neutral territory, but definitely my turf. I arrived 15 minutes early and selected a corner table where I could watch the entrance. Power Moves 101, courtesy of 14 years of learning how to control situations instead of being at their mercy. At exactly 2 o'clock, they walked in. I almost didn't recognize them. My parents had aged in ways that went beyond simple time. Dad's shoulders were stooped, his hair completely gray now. Mom looked smaller somehow, diminished, wearing an expression of nervous uncertainty that was completely foreign on her once confident face. They spotted me immediately, probably because I was the only person in the restaurant who looked like I belonged there. Success had given me a polish that was impossible to miss. Mia, Mom breathed as they approached the table. You look successful, I finished for her, standing to shake hands rather than offering hugs. Let's keep this professional. Dad's handshake was firm, but his eyes were troubled. You've done well for yourself, he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been pride if it wasn't 14 years too late. We sat down, ordered drinks, and endured several minutes of painful small talk about the weather and how nice the restaurant was. Finally, Mom cleared her throat. I suppose you've heard, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. About Jessica's affair with Tom Gardner? Yes, I heard. Dad flinched like I'd slapped him. Mia, we had no idea. That your golden child was capable of lying? I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because I seem to remember Jessica having quite a talent for creative storytelling. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We failed you. We failed you so completely, and we don't know how to begin to apologize. You could start by admitting what you did, I said calmly. Not what happened to me. Not what Jessica did. What you did. They looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. We threw you out, Dad said finally, his voice hoarse. We threw out our own daughter without asking questions, without investigating, without giving you a chance to defend yourself. We chose to believe the worst about you, Mom added, tears starting to fall. We abandoned you when you needed us most. I sipped my wine and waited. They weren't done yet. The whole town knows now, Dad continued. Everyone's talking about it. About what really happened, about what Jessica did, about how He stopped, unable to finish. About how you destroyed your own child to protect your reputation, I said helpfully. Yes, I imagine that's quite the conversation starter. Mom winced. People have been calling, some to apologize for believing the lies, others to express their opinions about our parenting. I almost smiled. Almost. The same people who'd whispered about the scandal 14 years ago were now turning their judgment on my parents. Public opinion was a fickle beast. Mrs. Henderson from church called yesterday, Mom said. She said she always wondered why we never fought for you, never questioned Jessica's story. She said any parent worth their salt would have asked more questions. Mrs. Henderson is right. We know, Dad said. We know. And we're so sorry, Mia. We're so goddamn sorry. It was the first time I'd ever heard my father swear. When we found out the truth, Mom continued, we started looking back at everything. All the signs we missed. All the times Jessica's stories didn't quite add up. The money that disappeared from my purse. The neighbor's packages that went missing when she was the only one home. The way she could turn any family conflict into being about her. You started to see the pattern, I said. A pattern we should have seen years ago, Dad said bitterly. But it was easier to believe her version of events. Jessica always made herself the victim or the hero. You just took whatever came your way without complaining. I was the easy target, I said matter-of-factly. I didn't fight back, didn't create drama, didn't demand attention. When Jessica needed someone to blame, I was convenient. The waiter approached to refill our drinks, and we all sat in silence until he left. We tried to find you, Mom said quietly. After we learned the truth, we tried to track you down, but you'd disappeared completely. I didn't disappear, I corrected. I built a new life, without you. A successful life, Dad observed, gesturing around the restaurant. You've clearly done very well for yourself. No thanks to my family. The words hung in the air like a challenge. We want to make this right, Mom said desperately. We want to be part of your life again, if you'll let us. I leaned back in my chair and studied their faces. They looked genuinely remorseful, genuinely devastated by the truth they'd finally been forced to confront. But I wasn't 15 anymore. I wasn't desperate for their approval or their love. I'd learned to live without both. What about Jessica? I asked. They exchanged another look, and I saw my answer before they spoke. She's been having a hard time, Mom said carefully. People are being very cruel to her. She's had to quit her job, and she's been staying with us while she figures out what to do next. Of course she was. Even now, even after the truth had come out, they were still protecting her. So let me understand this correctly, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You want to apologize to me for throwing me out based on her lies, but you're still taking care of her after those lies have been exposed. She's in a difficult situation, Dad said weakly. She's in a difficult situation because she destroyed an innocent person's life to save herself, I snapped. She's facing consequences for her actions. Novel concept, right? They both looked uncomfortable, caught between their guilt over me and their ingrained habit of protecting Jessica. We can work through this, Mom said pleadingly. All of us. As a family. I smiled then, and it wasn't a nice smile. Mom, we stopped being a family the night you chose Jessica's lies over your own daughter. You can't unring that bell. The truth was finally out there, exactly as detailed in the synopsis. But as I sat across from my parents, watching them squirm with their newfound knowledge, I realized something important. Their regret couldn't undo the damage they'd caused, and their continued protection of Jessica proved they still didn't understand what they'd really lost. 2 weeks after our restaurant meeting, my parents started calling daily. Not demanding or accusatory like the old days, but tentative, almost pleading. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Updates about their lives, questions about mine that I answered politely but vaguely, and carefully worded invitations to come home for holidays or family dinners. I let most of the calls go to voicemail. The messages painted a picture of their new reality. Dad's hardware business was struggling because people were taking their money elsewhere rather than support someone who'd abandoned his own child. Mom had been quietly asked to step down from her church committee leadership roles. Their social circle had contracted to only the most loyal friends. People cross the street when they see us, Mom said in one voicemail, her voice thick with tears. Yesterday, Mrs. Patterson, you remember her? She was always so kind. She just looked right through me at the grocery store. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been concerned about me when she saw me working at McDonald's all those years ago. Apparently, she remembered that conversation too. The irony was delicious. My parents were finally experiencing what I'd lived through as a teenager. Being judged, whispered about, treated like pariahs by their community. The difference was they'd earned it. But what really caught my attention was what they weren't saying in these calls. No mention of Jessica facing any real consequences. No indication that they'd stopped supporting her or demanded accountability. So I decided to do some investigating of my own. It took exactly 3 phone calls to people still in my hometown to get the full picture. Jessica was living with our parents, rent-free while they covered her expenses. She'd lost her job at the boutique, not because they fired her, but because she'd quit when the whispers and cold shoulders became too uncomfortable. "Your sister acts like she's the victim in all this," reported Sandy, my old high school lab partner who'd reached out on Facebook. "She tells anyone who'll listen that she was just young and stupid, that she never meant for you to get hurt. Like it was all some big misunderstanding instead of a calculated betrayal. Young and stupid." At 21, Jessica had been old enough to vote, old enough to drink, old enough to sign contracts. But apparently not old enough to take responsibility for destroying her teenage sister's life. "And your parents," Sandy continued. "They're still making excuses for her, saying she's fragile right now, that she needs support during this difficult time. People are getting really frustrated with their whole family." Of course they were making excuses. Even faced with undeniable proof of Jessica's manipulation, my parents couldn't break their pattern of protecting their golden child while expecting me to fend for myself. 3 weeks after our restaurant meeting, Dad called with a different tone in his voice. "Mia, we need to see you again. There's something important we need to discuss." "I'm listening. Not over the phone, please." "This weekend?" Curiosity won again. This time I chose a coffee shop near my office. More casual than Meridian, but still my territory. They looked worse than they had 2 weeks earlier. The stress was eating them alive, and for the first time I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. "How are you holding up?" I asked, which was probably more kindness than they deserved. "We're managing," Dad said, though his hollow eyes suggested otherwise. "But we wanted to talk to you about something specific." Mom leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "We've been thinking about what you said, about Jessica facing consequences, about how we've always protected her. And you're right," Dad said heavily. "We've enabled her for years. The lying, the manipulation, the way she never takes responsibility for anything. We created that by always cleaning up her messes." I waited. There was clearly more. "We've been going through old incidents," Mom continued. "Things we brushed off at the time, and now we're seeing them differently." They proceeded to tell me about a pattern I'd been too young to fully understand, but had definitely experienced. Money disappearing from Mom's purse that Jessica blamed on forgetfulness. Or maybe Mia took it. Expensive items going missing when Jessica was the only one home. Arguments starting whenever attention was focused on my achievements. "Remember when you got that science fair award in 8th grade?" Dad asked. I did remember. It had been one of my proudest moments, until Jessica had thrown a fit about feeling overlooked, claiming I always got the attention while she was ignored. "We made such a big deal about making her feel better," Mom said quietly, "that we barely celebrated your achievement. And now we realize she did it on purpose. She couldn't stand for you to have something she didn't. The worst part," Dad added, "is that we taught her this behavior worked. Every time she manipulated a situation, we rewarded it by giving her what she wanted." I sipped my coffee and watched my parents grapple with truths they should have faced decades ago. Better late than never, I supposed, but it was still decades too late. "What are you going to do about it?" I asked. They looked at each other with the expression of people facing an unpleasant but necessary task. "We're going to stop enabling her," Mom said. "We've already started. We told her she needs to find a job and start paying rent. And if she refuses, then she'll need to find somewhere else to live," Dad said, though his voice lacked conviction. I leaned back and studied them. They meant well, I could see that. But after 36 years of protecting Jessica from consequences, I doubted they had the backbone to follow through. "What's the real reason you wanted to see me today?" I asked. Mom's face crumpled slightly. "We were hoping, maybe if you came back, if our family started healing, people might be more willing to forgive us." Ah, there it was. Even their newfound awareness was ultimately about them. They didn't want to change their relationship with Jessica because it was right. They wanted to change it because their reputation depended on it. And Jessica? How does she feel about this new accountability? "She's adjusting," Dad said diplomatically, which meant she was fighting them every step of the way, probably playing the victim, probably threatening to cut them off if they didn't protect her like they always had. I stood up, suddenly tired of this conversation. "Good luck with that," I said. "I hope you follow through." "Will you consider giving us another chance?" Mom asked desperately. "All of us?" I looked down at these people who'd given me life and then nearly destroyed it. They were trying, I could see that. but they were still the same people who'd chosen Jessica's comfort over my survival for my entire childhood. "I'll think about it," I said, which was more than they deserved but less than they hoped for. As I walked back to my car, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Done waiting for them to become the parents I'd needed. Done hoping they'd choose me over Jessica. Done caring about their approval or their regret. They'd created this mess. Now they could live with it. 4 months passed before I heard from them again. 4 months of blessed silence while I focused on my business, my life, my chosen family of friends and colleagues who actually valued me. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing contracts in my office. "Mia?" Mom's voice was different. Older, more tired, but also steadier somehow. "Do you have a minute to talk?" "I'm listening." "We did it," she said simply. "We told Jessica she had to leave." I set down my pen and gave her my full attention. "What happened?" "She got a job offer in Denver. Good position, decent pay, enough to support herself. But she wanted us to give her money for first month's rent and security deposit, plus help with moving expenses. When we said no, she didn't take it well." I could imagine. Jessica's tantrums when she didn't get her way had been legendary. "She said some things." Dad's voice came through. Apparently, I was on speaker. "Cruel things about how we were choosing our precious Mia over our real daughter. She accused us of abandoning her to make you happy. How did you respond?" "We told her the truth," Mom said, "that we weren't doing this for you. We were doing it because 36 years of enabling her hadn't helped anyone. Not her, not us, not our family. She left 2 weeks ago," Dad added. "Took the job, moved to Denver. She's not speaking to us." The silence stretched while I processed this. My parents had actually followed through. They'd chosen accountability over comfort, consequences over enabling. It was 14 years too late, but they'd done it. "How are you feeling about it?" I asked. "Terrible," Mom said honestly. "And relieved. And proud of ourselves for finally doing the right thing. It's complicated." That I could understand. Growth usually felt complicated. "We know this doesn't fix anything," Dad said. "We know we can't undo the damage we caused. But we wanted you to know that we finally understand what enabling looks like, and we're not going to do it anymore." I stared out my office window at the city bustling below. People going about their lives, pursuing their dreams, building their futures without the baggage of toxic family dynamics. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "Mia," Mom's voice was tentative, "would you be willing to see us again? Not to ask for anything, just to talk?" I considered this. They'd proven they could change, could make hard choices, could finally prioritize what was right over what was easy. That deserved acknowledgement. "Okay," I said, "but this time you come to my house." The address I gave them was impressive. My house was in the kind of neighborhood that made a statement about success and security. When they pulled up the following Saturday afternoon, I watched from my front window as they sat in their car for a moment, taking in the reality of what I'd built. I met them at the door wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater. Casual but expensive, comfortable but polished. The message was clear. This was my space, my terms, my life that they were entering. "Your home is beautiful," Mom said as I led them through to the living room. And it was. I'd hired a decorator and spared no expense creating a space that felt both elegant and warm. "Thank you. Coffee? Water?" We settled in my living room with coffee and the afternoon light streaming through my floor-to-ceiling windows. For the first time in our recent conversations, nobody seemed to be performing or manipulating or hiding anything. "Tell me about Jessica," I said. Dad sighed heavily. "She called last week. She's struggling in Denver, claims her coworkers don't like her, says her apartment is too expensive and the city is unfriendly. Let me guess. She wants to come home. She wants us to support her while she finds herself," Mom said with air quotes. "Says this is all our fault for forcing her to leave before she was ready." "What did you tell her?" "That she's 36 years old and needs to figure it out," Dad said. "That we love her, but we're not going to rescue her from the consequences of her own choices anymore." I almost smiled. Almost. "She hung up on us," Mom added. "Said we'd destroyed our family by choosing our ungrateful daughter over her." Ungrateful. The word sat in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. "She never did understand irony," I said finally. We talked for 2 hours. About their business struggles, their social isolation, their process of examining their parenting choices and family dynamics. They asked about my work, my life, my travels, real questions that showed genuine interest rather than judgment. "We're proud of you," Dad said, as they were getting ready to leave. "Not just successful, but kind, strong, independent. Despite everything we put you through, you became an incredible woman. Despite everything, not because of it," I corrected gently. "We know," Mom said. We know we can't take credit for who you became. You did that yourself. At the door, Mom hesitated. Mia, I know we don't deserve it. And I know it might be impossible, but is there any chance we could be part of your life again? Not the way things were before, but something new? I looked at these people who'd failed me so completely, but who'd finally learned to fail better. They weren't the parents I'd needed growing up, but they might be people I could respect as an adult. We'll see, I said. Take it slow, see how it goes. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, and it wasn't a reunion. It was something more careful and conditional, a possibility rather than a promise. But for the first time in 14 years, it felt like a start. 6 months of tentative, careful relationship building followed. Monthly dinners, occasional phone calls, updates about their lives that didn't include expectations about mine. My parents were learning how to interact with me as an adult, rather than as the daughter they'd failed to protect. It was nice. Not perfect, not the close family relationship some people enjoyed, but respectful and genuine in ways our family dynamics had never been before. Which is why their phone call on a rainy Thursday evening caught me completely off guard. Mia, we need to talk to you about something, Dad said, his voice carrying that careful tone I'd learned to recognize as trouble. What's going on? It's about Jessica, Mom said, jumping in. She's been having a really hard time in Denver. I set down my wine glass and settled in for what I suspected would be an unpleasant conversation. Define hard time, I said. She lost her job 3 weeks ago, Dad explained. Something about personality conflicts with her supervisor. She's behind on rent, and her landlord is threatening eviction. Of course he was. Jessica had always been gifted at creating personality conflicts whenever people held her accountable for anything. I see. And? She's asked to come home, Mom said quietly. Temporarily, just until she gets back on her feet. The silence stretched while I processed this. After 6 months of growth, after finally learning to say no to their golden child, my parents were wavering. What did you tell her? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. We said we'd think about it, Dad admitted. We're conflicted, Mom added quickly. We know what you said about enabling, and we agree with you, but she's our daughter, and she's in trouble. She's 36 years old, I said flatly. She's not in trouble. She's facing consequences. We know, but what? But she's Jessica, so different rules apply? The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. Have you asked her what her plan is? I continued. How long temporarily means? What she's doing to address the pattern of job conflicts? Whether she's taken any responsibility for the situation she's in? She says it wasn't her fault, Mom said weakly. That her boss was unreasonable? That the work environment was toxic? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Of course she does. Because Jessica is never at fault for anything, is she? It's always someone else's problem. Mia, please, Dad said. We're trying to do the right thing here. The right thing for whom? For Jessica, who needs to learn that actions have consequences. Or for yourselves, because it's easier to enable her than deal with her tantrums? They didn't answer, which was answer enough. Let me ask you something, I said, walking to my window to look out at the city lights. In the 6 months since Jessica moved to Denver, how many times has she called just to check on you? How many times has she asked about your health, your business, your lives without needing something from you? More silence. That's what I thought. But the minute she needs money and a place to stay, suddenly she remembers she has parents. She's still our daughter, Mom said, tears in her voice. So am I replied quietly. And when I needed you most, you threw me away without a second thought. But Jessica gets infinite chances because she's learned how to manipulate your guilt. I heard Mom's sharp intake of breath. That's not fair, Dad said. Isn't it? You spent my entire childhood prioritizing Jessica's comfort over my well-being. You threw me out of your home based on her lies. You enabled her manipulation for decades. And now, after 6 months of pretending you've changed, you're ready to do it all over again. We have changed, Mom protested. Have you? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like Jessica called crying and you immediately started making excuses for her. Sounds like the same pattern to me. The harsh truth was that I'd known this moment would come. I'd hoped my parents had genuinely learned something, but part of me had been waiting for them to revert to their default setting. Protect Jessica at all costs. What would you have us do? Dad asked. Let her be homeless? I'd have you be honest about what's happening here, I said. Jessica created this situation. Jessica can solve this situation. You helping her avoid consequences isn't love, it's enabling. And frankly, it's insulting to me that you think I'd support it. We're not asking you to support anything, Mom said quickly. Yes, you are. You're asking me to pretend that our relationship can continue while you go back to prioritizing Jessica's wants over basic fairness. You're asking me to watch you throw away 6 months of growth because Jessica snapped her fingers. I paused, looking at my reflection in the dark window. Here's what I think you should do, I continued. Tell Jessica that she's an adult who needs to solve her own problems, that you love her but won't rescue her from her own choices, that you'll support her emotionally but not financially, that she needs to find her own way forward. And if she cuts us off? Dad asked quietly. Then you'll learn who she really is, I said. Someone who only loves you when you're useful to her. The conversation ended soon after, with promises to think about what I'd said and consider all options. But I could hear it in their voices. They were going to take Jessica back. They were going to fall right back into their old patterns. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete clarity. I'd given my parents a chance to prove they'd really changed. Instead, they'd proven that their growth was conditional, limited, and ultimately reversible when tested by Jessica's manipulation. I wasn't angry. I was just done. Some people never really change. They just learn to hide their dysfunction better for a while. And I was too old to keep hoping they'd become the parents I'd needed. They took her back, of course. Jessica moved home 3 days after our phone conversation, and my parents fell right back into their familiar patterns of justification and enablement. I learned this not from them. They stopped calling after Jessica moved in, probably because they knew I'd disapprove, but from Sandy, who'd become my unofficial hometown correspondent. Your sister's back, she reported during one of our monthly catch-up calls. Living with your parents rent-free while she looks for opportunities. That's a direct quote from your mother. By the way, how long has it been? I asked. 2 months now. And get this. Yesterday, I saw Jessica at the grocery store and she was complaining to anyone who'd listen about how hard it is to find good employers these days. Apparently, every company in Denver had toxic management. I almost smiled. Some things never changed. And your parents? Looking exhausted. Your dad's business is barely hanging on. Turns out publicly shunning your innocent daughter isn't great for customer loyalty. Your mom's been asking around about part-time work to help make ends meet. While Jessica lived in their house, ate their food, and contributed nothing but complaints about her prospects. The really sad part, Sandy continued, is that people were starting to warm up to your parents again. They'd been making an effort, apologizing to folks, trying to repair relationships, but taking Jessica back after everything that came out. It's like they learned nothing. That evening, as I sat in my home office reviewing proposals for a new client expansion, I realized I needed to make a decision about my parents once and for all. They'd shown me who they were, repeatedly, consistently, over 37 years of my life. People who prioritized appearance over truth, comfort over justice, and Jessica's wants over everyone else's needs. For a brief moment, they'd seemed capable of growth, but when tested, they'd reverted immediately to their default setting. I wasn't going to keep hoping they'd change. Hope was exhausting, and I had better things to do with my energy. 3 weeks later, Dad called. "Mia," he said, his voice careful and nervous. "How are you doing?" "I'm well, thanks. You?" "We're managing. Listen, I was hoping we could get together soon. Maybe dinner? Our treat." Our treat. Like the problem was who paid for the meal, rather than the fundamental dysfunction they'd chosen to embrace again. "Why?" I asked simply. "Why what? Why do you want to have dinner? What's the purpose of this meeting?" A pause. "To spend time with you. To maintain our relationship." "What relationship, Dad? We haven't spoken in 3 months. You made your choice when you took Jessica back. That's not fair." "Mia, she's our daughter too. She's your daughter who destroyed my life with calculated lies and is now manipulating you into supporting her as a 36-year-old woman who refuses to take responsibility for anything. And you're enabling it. Again, it's complicated. No, it isn't. It's simple. You choose Jessica over everyone else, including basic honesty and fairness. You always have." Another pause, longer this time. "We miss you," he said quietly. "You miss the idea of me. You miss being able to feel good about yourselves by having a relationship with the daughter you wronged, but you don't actually want to change anything. We're trying to balance." "Stop." My voice was firm but not angry. "Just stop. You can't balance a relationship with me while enabling Jessica. Those two things are incompatible." I heard him sigh heavily. "Your mother and we're having some financial difficulties. The business is struggling, and with Jessica staying with us." And there it was. The real reason for the call. "You want money?" I said. "We were hoping, maybe a loan, just to help us get through this rough patch. We know you've done well for yourself." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the framed photo on my desk, me receiving an award for Businesswoman of the Year. A photo taken by friends who celebrated my success instead of trying to profit from it. Let me understand this correctly, I said slowly. You want me to financially support the household where Jessica lives rent-free while contributing nothing. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. You're asking me to subsidize her lifestyle while she takes advantage of you. Mia, please. We're family. I almost laughed at the irony. Family! The same family that threw me out at 15? The same family that chose to believe lies over their own daughter? The same family that's now asking that daughter for money to support the liar? Silence. Here's the thing, Dad. I built this life myself. Every dollar I earned, every success I achieved, every opportunity I created, I did it without family support. I did it despite family betrayal. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city I'd conquered through sheer determination. I learned to survive without you. I learned to thrive without you. And I learned that I don't need your approval, your love, or your presence to have a meaningful life. Mia, I forgive you, I said quietly. Both of you. Not because you've earned it, but because carrying anger was hurting me more than you. But forgiveness doesn't mean relationship, and it sure as hell doesn't mean I'm going to fund your choices. What are we supposed to do? He asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Figure it out. You're adults. You made the choice to enable Jessica again, knowing it would cost you our relationship and damage your finances. Now you get to live with those consequences. I paused, making sure my next words were clear. As long as you're supporting Jessica while she contributes nothing, you won't receive a penny from me. As long as you're enabling her manipulation and irresponsibility, we won't have a relationship. And as long as you prioritize her comfort over basic fairness, you'll have exactly the family you chose to create. You're really going to cut us off? I'm not cutting you off. Dad, I'm choosing not to participate in dysfunction. There's a difference. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet office and felt something I'd been seeking for 22 years. Complete peace. I'd tried to rebuild a relationship with my parents. I'd given them chances to prove they'd change, to show they could prioritize growth over comfort, accountability over enablement. Instead, they'd shown me exactly who they were, people who would sacrifice anything and anyone to maintain Jessica's approval. And I was okay with that. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. You can't change people who don't want to change. I was 37 years old, successful beyond my wildest teenage dreams, surrounded by people who valued and respected me. I'd built a life so full and rich that my parents' dysfunction couldn't touch it. They'd made their choice. Jessica would always come first. Truth would always be secondary, and enabling would always be easier than accountability. I'd made my choice too. I chose peace. I chose dignity. I chose the family I'd built rather than the family I'd been born into. And for the first time in my entire life, I was completely free.